So, I've been really fascinated with the game Pirate Borg for a good while now. If you're not familiar, it's a rules light, dark fantasy role playing game based on the rules of Mork Borg, which itself is like an ultralight version of D&D. The setting of Pirate Borg, which was written and illustrated by Luke Stratton of Limithron, is what he calls Dark Caribbean. This is essentially an expansive, zanier version of the setting in Pirates of the Caribbean. You have spirits, monsters, non-human speaking characters, but also Lovecraftian elements, vampires, and other sort of pulp fiction elements. Actually, I'm really neutral on the pirate setting and on pirates generally. They're fun, but they don't occupy a special place in my heart. What makes the game so interesting to me is how it evokes a desire for playfulness. And it's not just me. The game's creator and his team at Limithron have worked really hard to build up an infrastructure of organized play and a fun, lively convention presence that reinforces the sort of childlike spirit of pirates. And I mean that in a good way. There is one other aspect of the game that I've been fascinated by as well, and that is the game as a product. Any given RPG starts off as a book, and in most cases that extends to a PDF version of the book. I think the next logical extension to an RPG might be digital assets like maps and tokens for a virtual tabletop, or maybe some specialty or collectible dice. Then the next major expansion would be supplemental books that offer a campaign or adventure, or new rules or setting details. Then after that, you might put together a starter set box, and at that point, you really start to have a product that serves existing and new audiences. But Pirate Borg has gone way, way beyond these foundational product concepts. For a team as small as Limithron, they've fleshed out a product line that rivals that of games from much bigger publishers. But I guess that brings up one question. Is all this stuff that they've made maybe just a bit too much? In this video, I want to discuss a few things. First, I want to unbox and show you almost everything in the Pirate Borg product line so far. Then briefly touch on what is being crowdfunded at the time of recording, which is expanding the game both in the first party and third party space. Then I want to touch on the third party license and how it has done magical things. And finally, I want to briefly mention my Pirate Borg inspired projects that have actually spiraled out of control and become games all their own. First, let's look at all, or at least most, of the things that constitute Pirate Borg as a product at this point. As I'm going through all this stuff, ask yourself if this item is just fluff or if it actually helps GMs and players play the actual game. I think that's important for any RPG product line. The first thing out of the box here are Devil's Luck coins. Devil's Luck is the meta currency of the game. You spend them to reroll dice or max out damage on an attack or things like that. The drawstring bag is extremely convenient, and the coins themselves are large, relatively thick, and heavy. They also each act as a D2. These actually get used in the game constantly, and it's just nice to have real metal coins at the table. The next thing is the Dark Caribbean dice set. There are 3 other dice set colors available on the website, and a jet black dice set that only comes with the starter box. And you have to admit, they are a little on the pricey side, but they do come with a dice bag. And I'm not sure if I can communicate this in the video, but they feel good. They're made of a sort of hard resin that just feels slightly different from plastic. And they're a bit jumbo sized, and the lettering is massive for max readability. The D4 is also in the non-annoying shape here, and there's a D2 coin, just massively thick and very useful in play actually. The D20 has a skull for the 20, and there are actually 2 D20s. I think it would be a tad excessive to buy all 4 resin dice collections, but owning one of these sets is really quite a privilege, just because of the usability and utility. There might be some spoilers as I show you some of these pamphlets and other things, by the way. I'll try to keep that to a minimum. Dead Man's Cove is a trifold pamphlet that gives you a sample of naval combat and basic encounters. I've run this one myself, and I highly recommend it for any GMs new to this game. The GM screen is made from a really thick cardboard and wrapped in a full color matte finish. There are 2 things to note about the screen. One, it's packed and organized extremely well on the back if you're running the game. And 2, the ship on the front glows in the dark. I feel like the glow-in-the-dark stuff like this and the dice are a bit strange because I'm never playing RPGs in the dark or even in dim rooms. Due to the nature of pencil and paper RPGs, you need light to see the paper. The only way I can see this working is if everyone has an old school looking candle to see their character sheets or something. Buried in the Bahamas is another introductory adventure. It's a bit more substantial than Dead Man's Cove, being a staple-bound zine that provides a number of points to explore. I haven't run this one yet at the time of this recording, but it seems to me like an excellent template for a zine-length adventure in case you are feeling inspired to write a third-party adventure for Pirate Borg. It's quite dense with usable material, front to back. The Sinking of Fatagan is a pretty remarkable adventure. It's funny because I recently thought of trying to present one-shot adventures on a tabloid-sized piece of paper, but it looks like Luke came up with the idea years before me and on an even bigger piece of paper. On one side is the map for the adventure. By the way, Luke is quite an accomplished artist and fantasy cartographer, if you haven't noticed. And on the other side is everything you need to run the adventure. I haven't run this yet, but I think my only quibble with it from the outset is that as the GM, you'd want to continuously show the map to players, but you're also needing to refer to the information on the back of the map. Cavern of Cursed Tears is another trifold one-shot, this one done on heavy cardstock and unfolding into a uniquely wide 17.5-inch piece of paper. It's about 8.25 inches tall. It's a very linear adventure, but perfect for convention play or for tables where players are okay with a more amusement ride kind of experience rather than a sandboxy go wherever you want kind of thing. The Player's Guidebook is an 80-page hardbound book that contains just the player-facing rules and character creation stuff. The book itself is over-constructed in terms of quality. They went with Standart for their printer on these and on other hardcover books, so you get the max quality that you see in other books like Old School Essentials and a lot of Free League. I don't think it's necessary to have multiple copies of this for players, but I have personally handed this to players at the table while running this game, and it has come in handy many times over in a session. Cabin Fever is a 170-page hardcover book that collects a whole bunch of third-party materials and presents them in a very colorful, splashy Borg manner that matches the spirit of the core rulebook. There are a ton of interesting ideas and concepts in this volume that have come from the Pirate Borg community, and I do want to discuss the third-party license for this game later in the video, but I think it's just worth mentioning here that the PDF version of Cabin Fever is free on the Limithron website, so you can get all of this very interesting content for free right now. It's pretty cool. Down Among the Dead is the product of a crowdfunding campaign by Limithron and really shows Luke as an artist and a game designer and Pirate Borg as a product line growing, maturing, and becoming better than ever. This book is a 146-page compendium of 3 main multi-session adventures, as well as a few new classes, some generators, and maybe one of the most interesting things to me, a collection of house rules, some of which I find indispensable, including Hits Always Hurt, where you deal 1 HP damage even if you miss. Also, no armor dice, where instead of rolling for damage reduction with each hit, you just reduce by a set amount. As for the 3 adventures themselves, they're all quite different from each other. The first one, Lost to the Locker, starts your character off as dead, and you have to navigate and fight your way out of an underworld purgatory. It's a really clever idea for an adventure because you can bolt it onto any Pirate Borg adventure where 1 or more PCs dies, or just use elements of the purgatory and keep a dead PC's adventure going in some way or another. But here's one of many examples of what I mean by Luke's art growing and getting better and better. This whole book is just filled with cool stuff like this. Venom in the Veins is the second adventure in Down Among the Dead. Admittedly, this is more of a standard dungeon crawl, but I think the collection needed a more grounded, meat and potatoes adventure like this to maintain the game's association with old school play and culture. I think the greatest thing about this dungeon crawl is the presentation of the rooms. We first saw this style of dungeon presentation at the end of Mork Borg itself, and it has been slightly enhanced here with multiple colors and room number references at the edges of the pages. Really nice. Into the Maelstrom dives right back into that more imaginative, high concept stuff. In this case, you're on a gigantic ship hunting down a vampire, Strahd style. There's a cast of NPCs and a race against time. I think one of the most notable features of this adventure is that you're essentially in a dungeon, but it's in the form of a ship, and there are a ton of encounters from deck to deck, but also a whole town to explore and an abbey, and a hollow, and an island. All in all, this book is really good stuff, maybe the second most important product in the whole line, aside from the core rulebook. A close third in that list of most important things to get for Pirate Borg would be this, the starter set. I'm going to quickly paw through the contents of this box and maybe you can see how much value there is for the price. First, you get these black and white dice. They're the same size and typeset as those resin dice we saw earlier, but they're plastic. And again, if this is the color you want, the only way to get these is to get the starter set. There's an abbreviated GM screen built into the insides of both halves of the box, which is not something I've seen since maybe the TSR days. There's a small stack of poker-sized cards that depict key items, enemies, and NPCs from the starter adventure called Trapped in the Tropics. So I actually spent a few days running this adventure, and admittedly, I changed a lot of details, I cut a lot, and generally made it my own, but having all these reference cards goes beyond just running that one particular adventure. You can use these to run a pretty decent variety of scenarios. There are dry erase markers here because there are dry erase character sheets, which may not be for everyone, but are especially good for one-shots and casual play. Here's a staple-bound version of the 80-page player's guide. It's interesting how different a book can feel in hand when it's printed like this versus when it's printed like this. Either way, it's the same book, equally extremely useful at the table with new or novice Pirate Borg players. Trapped in the Tropics is the starter box's starter adventure. It's one I'm pretty familiar with at this point. The PCs are tasked with exploring several islands before facing off against an angry ghost inside of a volcano. It's very well organized, and the island adventures are compartmentalized so you can mix and match and cut away parts that you don't have time to run. On the whole, it almost feels like another sequel to Pirates of the Caribbean, which I think is more or less what this game is generally, a Pirates of the Caribbean on steroids. I had a lot of fun with this adventure, but went the extra mile and 3D printed a lot of the terrain for the various scenes, which I think added to my personal enjoyment of running it, but you don't need 3D printed stuff to run the encounters. In fact, all the maps and tokens for virtually every encounter, NPC, and enemy is included in this box. There's a pad of color tearaway character sheets. These were favored by my players over all of the other character sheet options that Limithron has developed for the game so far. This box comes with a lot of large double-sided maps. The first one here shows you the ship that you find on one of the islands suspended in vines. You don't just look at the map though, you can actually place your character tokens on the map to track where you are on it. The ship will eventually fall and crash on the jungle floor with the PCs in it, so that's fun. The other side shows a side and top view of a small ship that your PCs may acquire. Again, this is roughly to the scale of your cardboard tokens, so you can run an encounter in and on this ship. The next map has a much larger 3-deck, 3-masted ship for even more swashbuckling. Very nice. The print quality is not extremely vibrant, but it more than does the job here. On the back, we get 2 maps, one of St. Martin, the town that you do some adventuring in, and a map of the 3 islands that you explore generally. Notice how the map folds exactly in half where the 2 maps meet. It's a very thoughtful feature. Okay, this next map is of essentially the game's entire setting. You'll recognize it as the Caribbean, but in this case, it's the dark Caribbean, of course. And those 3 islands that we just saw are in fact pictured on the far east side of this map. On the other side is a naval hex map that you can use to run naval battles. This is pretty good if you're in a pinch, but Limithron also sells a larger 3-foot by 3-foot deluxe neoprene naval battle map that won't shift around on the table if you're ready to take your Pirate Borg game to the next level. This next thing is a treasure map that you're asked to actually rip in half, which just feels wrong, but you have to do it because players love pieces of maps that they eventually put together to figure something out. It's a classic pirate trope. Next, there is a volcano encounter map. That's the encounter with Ephira, the Atlantean ghost who wants to destroy the world or whatever. And on the other side is a beach encounter map that you might use in a couple of different spots in the adventure, and is just a good general use map. Then you have the thick cardboard tokens. Like I mentioned, you get tokens for everything that you need to run the starter adventure, as well as maybe some elements of a generic adventure. These time of day tokens are meant to be stacked in order. And as time progresses throughout the day, you take the top token and put it on the bottom of the stack. I actually used these quite a bit when running the game, and it was extremely handy. In the end, this is one of those product of the year kind of starter sets. You get way too much for what you're paying for, but I think the idea is to broadside GMs and customers with the notion that Pirate Borg really wants them to run and enjoy the game with as few impediments as possible. I don't see how Limithron makes any amount of money with the sale of these boxed sets. Certainly there's profit in their other stuff, but this is just too good for the price. I kind of wonder if this will be a collector's item one day, maybe 30 years from now when people are looking back on the 2020s, back when RPGs were still good. One other set of products that I wanted to briefly mention was The Boarding Party, which is a collection of 3 crowdfund campaigns going on at the time of this recording. The first campaign is from Limithron and is a boxed set of hundreds of hand-drawn encounter maps. These are all heavily laminated and come with an optional encounter atlas that actually fleshes out useful encounters for each map. The second campaign is for official Pirate Borg miniatures by Westphalia. These are mostly or all based on Luke Stratton's illustrations, and they all capture that Pirate Borgy feel to them. You can get these in physical form through Kickstarter or as printable STLs through My Mini Factory. The third campaign is for a 5v5 Pirate Borg tabletop skirmish game called From the Depths Below by Will R.D., the author of the Morkborg skirmish game Forbidden Psalm. I actually made a video covering all 3 of these campaigns in detail, including some thoughts that I had after running the skirmish game. I'll leave a link below to that video, as well as where you can find the campaigns themselves. One of the most remarkable things about Pirate Borg is the third-party ecosystem that grew around it almost immediately upon its first release. Adventures, maps, campaigns, all kinds of supplements started appearing from creators and hasn't stopped since. Every adventure or campaign setting sold by another creator promotes the core game. So all these third-party creators, in some ways, are collaborators for Limithron. Pirate Borg has benefited enormously from this effect. So when you consider this larger body of work, Pirate Borg feels less like a single product line and more like a creative community orbiting a core rulebook. Pirate Borg has even inspired me to create an RPG of my own, Dark Kingdom Koreana, although I have to say up front that this game has evolved into something that isn't Borg compatible. It's largely the same framework, but you can take temporary attribute damage, and armor doesn't reduce incoming damage, it just gives you extra hit points. There's also baked in drama every time you die, with a chance to outsmart or even kill a Korean Grim Reaper. Actually, it's departed so much that I had to drop Borg from the title, but I still owe the inspiration for this game to Luke Stratton and the play forward culture that he and his team have created online and at conventions over the years. At the time of this recording, I'm also running a crowdfund campaign that provides just the naval combat from Dark Kingdom Koreana. This carve-out will come as a 16-page zine containing the core rules and 9 warships, but the digital version will come as a 40-plus page PDF along with multiple colors of a giant blank hex map and all the tokens you need to build out any of 12 different naval skirmishes or missions. All this stuff will end up in the final core game, but it's being offered here separately as its own functioning tabletop skirmish game. And again, these naval combat rules come from Luke's own rules. I've modified them to a moderate degree, but I have relied on Pirate Borg's underlying framework. I'll leave a link to my Kickstarter below. So again, let's go back to the question, is all of this too much? The dice, the maps, starter set, adventures, miniature, skirmish game, third-party books, the accessories. Looking at the entire product line laid out in front of me, I don't really think so. I can't actually speak for all the third-party stuff, but every product in the official Pirate Borg product line points towards a single goal, making the game easier to run and easier to play. I think in particular here, and more than any other aspect in the game as a whole, are the number of maps available to use with the game. Luke Stratton's Patreon is largely about providing encounter maps to his player base, and at this point there are hundreds of them. They're integrated into Roll20 and Foundry in particular, and they're otherwise either free to download or behind a paywall of about $5. Before he wrote this game, he was drawing maps, and he's still drawing maps. The thing about maps in any Borg game is that they greatly enhance an encounter or scene, since combat is grid-based and a lot of what you do in the game is combat. What's interesting about the success and proliferation of Pirate Borg is none of it has been guaranteed by the quality or playability of the underlying mechanics. Black Powder and Brimstone, for example, is excellent, arguably operating in much the same mechanical space, and even has the benefit of being published by Free League. Rapscallion is another strong pirate-themed RPG that just came out with plenty of imagination behind it, but neither have generated the same kind of momentum, community involvement, or gravitational pull that Pirate Borg enjoys, nor have any of the dozen other pirate RPGs that I can think of. I think Pirate Borg simply does weird things to people. It makes people want to make maps and miniatures and adventures and skirmish games for it and dress up like a pirate and even create entirely new games. I mean, it did that to me. Every so often a role-playing game stops being just a product and starts becoming a creative platform and a foundation for inspiration, and I think Pirate Borg has definitely crossed that threshold. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this down below, and remember to like and subscribe for more RPG reviews, and join the channel as a member for exclusive videos and content. Links for everything are down below. I'll see you in the next one.